But the governments actually forgot to develop the peripheries, and that includes South Sudan. So, but in terms of resources, both natural and human resources, I can say that the country has the potential to be a successful country. However, to realize that potential, a lot has to be done in terms of economic development and in terms of developing the human resources in terms of education and so on. Then perhaps it will be successful in a long run. Yeah.
So your estimation, do you think the current leadership has what it takes to nurture the capacity building, whether it is providing proper schooling or implementing social development? I mean, does it have what it takes?
I can frame the question in a different way. The country as a whole, not only focusing on the leadership, but the people of South Sudan have the potential to develop the country. As far as the leadership is concerned, there are people in the leadership that are concerned about the development of the country, and maybe there are those who are not serious about it. But if people put their effort together, as they did when they were fighting for their own independence, I have the feeling that they'll be able to bring up the country to a level that people will say, okay, despite the struggles, despite the difficulties, they're able to improve their situation. And this goes back to leadership. Leadership has to have a strong will, political will, to develop the country.
And the current leadership comes from where? I mean, educationally.
Most of the people who are now leading the South, some of them were educated in Sudan.
Okay.
Yeah. Others were educated outside Sudan, in countries like Egypt, Britain, the United States. Like if we take the leader of the Sudan People Liberation Army, who died in 2005, Dr. John Gereng de Mabir, actually, he did his graduate studies here in the U.S. Yeah. So they're educated outside as well as inside Sudan. But the majority of them actually were educated in Egypt, Britain, the U.S. for their postgraduate studies. But their basic studies, like from primary up to undergraduates, most of them actually did it in Sudan. And others did it outside.
You as a citizen of South Sudan, educated and resides in the West, if the government needs you to go and be part of its leadership, would you go?
At the moment, I don't think I'll be able to go because I tried before. I tried in 2007 and 2008 when they offered me a job to work in the government. But I couldn't continue with that work because of the fact that I have other responsibilities here. I have a young family, I have small children, so they also need my attention. But if the circumstances change, and I think I mentioned that in our previous discussions, that if the situation change in terms of education, in terms of health services, and other basic needs that actually would allow somebody from the U.S. to go and serve the government, I'll be able to do that. But I prefer not to work in the government. I prefer to go to learning institutions like a university, whereby I'll be able also to impart my knowledge to the younger generation in that country, because many people there actually need education. And at the moment, I'll not be able to commit myself to go and work with the government.
But are there diaspora movements or associations or efforts in helping, the people of Sudan politically or economically or otherwise?
Yeah, actually, most of the people who went back are now serving in the government.
Okay.
The majority of them actually are from the diaspora.
Okay.
Who are serving the government. And there are other people from the diaspora who went there and established their own businesses. But the sad fact is that most of the South Sudanese who are in the diaspora are unable to help economically.
Okay.
And this goes back to their situation in their countries, in the host countries. Some of them, maybe they don't have the economic capacity to do that, or others also are struggling here. So most of them actually are unable, but I'm not denying the fact that there are some organizations that actually went back to help in the rebuilding efforts of the country. And also there are some organizations, although they function here in the U.S., but they help in terms of transferring information and so on and so forth.
We know that in Africa, every African country has an unseen master. Whether it's France or Belgium or England. So who is the unseen master of South Sudan, if there are any?
I cannot say an unseen master, but there are so many external powers that are influencing events. Not only in South Sudan, but in many African countries. And I think at the beginning of the show, you mentioned China, and China built an office for the African Union. So I'm sure there are other external influences in the new nation, and China might be one of them, because China also has interest in the oil. That was established long before the creation of the new nation between the Chinese government and the government in the Republic of Sudan. So the U.S. also maybe has its own influence. And there are so many regional powers also that has their own influence. Countries like Uganda, maybe they have their own influence on the new nation, countries like Eritrea, Ethiopia, and so on and so forth. So in terms of external influence and how this influence actually affect the policies in the country, there exists that influence. And I think it applies to almost all African countries, because everybody has an interest.
And there are a lot of resources.
And a lot of resources,
During the Civil War, the international community complained about, the racial treatment of the Northern Sudanese on the South Sudanese. So, you think the situation was as racist as it was pronounced? The relationship between the South and the North?
Actually, to answer that question, it has to go back to why the Southern Sudanese actually went to war against the North. And this goes back to the policies that were implemented, whether during the colonial period or after the colonial period, when the successive governments in the North actually implemented policies that favor a specific aspects
Okay.
of the society. For example, the issue of religion usually come up because the successive governments wanted to define the identity of the country in terms of Islam and Arab culture.
Okay.
So that's one aspect that many Southern Sudanese actually took up arms because they felt like their African identity is marginalized in the context of the united identity of Sudan.
Okay.
And the other aspect is religion. Racially, I don't think maybe there's a racial aspect of it. And the racial aspects go back to the fact that during the colonial period and even before the colonial period, slavery was practiced in Sudan. And many people who were enslaved came from the southern part and western part of the country. So maybe we can say that there was also a racial factor. But the conflict actually was a combination of many issues, including race, religion, issues of identity, issues of economic marginalization, political marginalization, and other aspects that affect many people in the South.
Can you talk a little bit about, the slavery? Because most people will say, no, slavery has ended long time ago. What type of slavery are you talking about?
When I mention slavery, I'm not talking about contemporary slavery. I'm talking about slavery when it happened, even before the coming, like in the 18th century, for example. There was slavery going on. And many people who were sold to the Arab world, sometimes to Egypt and then the Middle East, most of the people actually were brought from the south, southern part of the country. And recently during the conflict, the second conflict, 1983, 2005, people actually campaigned about slavery. And that one, I think, we can term it also slavery because many people were brought from the south and worked in the north as domestic servants, as domestic servants in people's houses, or they work in agricultural schemes. So we can term that as a new form of slavery, because they are forced against their will to do that kind of job.
Between the Arabs and the non-Arabs, or between the North and the South, when you look at the government, pretty much there's, skin-wise, there's no difference. So I think that's confusing to most people. Most people would expect, when you said the Arab dominance or the Arabizing of the South, people will expect a different skin tone. But really, the northern, most of the people in the north look just like those people in the south. So where does the Arabize lies? Because if they're all Sudanese and they all look alike, are there external, Arab nations or groups that are part of it, or is it just, ideology?
I think it's just ideology. Because when we talk about the Arab race, we cannot limit, when we talk about race in the context of Sudan, we cannot talk about the skin color. Because you will be confused who is an Arab and who is not an Arab if you just emphasize the skin color. But in the context of the country before it was split, those who consider themselves Arab is not based on their skin color, but based on the ideological understanding and the cultural connection that they create